high enough, and so I want you to know. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce January Contreras. Ms. Contreras is a former Deputy County Attorney, Assistant Attorney General, and Advisor to Governor Janet Napolitano. In 2009, she joined the Obama administration, where she worked on the White House Council on Women and Girls. Her work within the council led to the creation of the Council on Combating Violence Against Women to strengthen protections for immigrant victims of crime, especially battered immigrant women. She returned to Arizona and founded Always, Arizona Legal Women and Youth Services, to provide life-saving and life-changing legal services to vulnerable kids and young adults. She has also received numerous awards for her work and dedication to the issues of immigration, women, and youth. Today she presents her lecture entitled Building a Justice System Where No One is Left Behind. Please give a round, big welcome to January Contreras.
How does that sound? All right? Okay. Well, I want to first say thanks for the opportunity to be here with you. I understand you just got back from fall break, and so I'm happy to be here with you on your first day back and share a little bit about not just my own career, but about the challenge that lies before all of us. You're in justice studies. I understand some of you know you want to go to law school or you want to get a graduate degree. Some of you know you want to be of use in this country, in this world, but you don't know how yet. I just want to thank you for wanting to be a part of the solution that our country, that our world, that our state needs. It can be overwhelming, I know. I have 2 teenage sons who constantly are bringing very big issues to the table and questioning what is it going to be like if they choose to have children, what are we leaving? And it's hard, I know, sometimes not to be overwhelmed, but I will say that I'm happy to be here with you, that as individuals, we can in fact find ways to be part of the solution, and that by being here, I hope that means, and I thank you, if it does mean that you've decided for yourself you want to be a part of that solution. So I'm January Contreras. I am a lawyer. I've been so glad and grateful that I chose to go to law school. I did not think I wanted to go to law school as an undergrad, even when I graduated. I was a media major. I wanted to uncover corruption and all these issues on TV. That's really what I thought I would do. I had an internship my senior year that was like 30 hours a week. It was very involved in a TV station. Quite honestly, I knew once I did that and I watched the reporters cry a few times a week at least, that that's not where I wanted to be. But I was already graduating, so I moved forward. I did get a job very briefly at a TV station, making $7 an hour as a broadcast associate, and I started studying for the LSAT then, because I felt that I could be a part of the solution. So I put up here as the title of my talk, Building a Justice System Where No One is Left Behind. I don't want to give you the illusion that I'm showing up to provide all the answers, and how do we do that? Because I don't have all the answers. But I will say that I have been afforded a very amazing career by showing up to things the way that you showed up today. And I have seen ways that we as individuals can be a part of building this, you guys are in a school of transformation. Boy, ever are we in need of some serious transformation. So in my career, I started as a county prosecutor. I spent some time system in a different way. I went to the Attorney General's office. I prosecuted crimes that happen in nursing homes. Talk about people who are left behind. As much as we love our loved ones who are in nursing homes, it can be very tough, and we need to show up for them. I went on then, when I was an Assistant Attorney General, I worked for Janet Napolitano, who was the AG, the Attorney General, and had the privilege of going to her, to the governor's office, working in healthcare. So I went from prosecuting crimes in healthcare facilities, including corruption, and then going forward to be an assistant director in a health agency, working for the governor directly on her staff, and then being appointed by her to direct in the Arizona Department of Health Services. She got tapped to join the Obama administration. I was the one saying, oh, you guys are going to have a great time. I had no desire to go to DC. But sure enough, the stars aligned in such a way that my family, my husband, my 2 kids, my mom, thank goodness for her, and our beagle, we all packed up and we went to DC. Amazing to see policy being made, being enforced, being shaped at that level of government. Had the opportunity to get into these issues that I never would have dreamed of when I was sitting where you are. And then to see some of that come full circle, and I'm going to share one case with you as an example of what that looks like. When I was there at the Obama administration, we wanted to come home, my kids wanted to come home, and I wanted to still be a part of the solution. And so I came home. I started Always, Arizona Legal Women and Youth Services. We are a legal aid center, and we are lawyers to kids and young adults dealing with homelessness, with abuse, who have been impacted by the foster care system, and we serve human trafficking survivors of all ages. Also would have never believed I'd be working on the cases that I have worked on for the last 8 years. Last Friday was actually my very last day with Always, so you are getting me in a bit of a change in my career as well. You know, you hear it's expected that maybe you don't know exactly what you want to do. Well, try being, I just turned 50. I don't know exactly what I want to do next. But I know that I have seen the power of the law, the power of government when we try to use it for good. And there are a lot of options out there once I do decide which is the direction that I want to go in. So I just want to start by giving you an example of one case and how your work can become full circle. Because the title here is Building a Justice System Where No One is Left Behind. We see the news, we read articles, you likely are studying history and current events, what's happening in our own society today. You know that there are people who are left behind. I can tell you in my legal aid work, it's the same people who are left behind over and over. And when I look at our clients, so many of them grew up very, very financially challenged, living day to day. Many have mental health or substance abuse issues in their own home. Many are survivors of abuse of different types in their own home. Many are kids, a lot of young moms of color. But even when they're not, you have these other factors in common. And it comes down to not having a safe place to live, comes down to not having safe childcare, comes down to not growing up with the same type of support that many of us, and not all of us, some of us know what those challenges are in different ways, but those in place. And so when I talk about leaving no one behind, it's something that we embrace across the spectrum. When we talk about justice, it is not just the criminal justice system. We just did some research with an intern who's hoping to come to ASU next year on disproportionate impact by our foster care system here in Arizona. We can see it when we look at it that some families are affected more, some communities more, by the foster care system. When we look at housing, when we look at what the challenges are in rural Arizona, when we look at what the resources are in tribal communities across Arizona, the very young, the very old, there are a lot of ways that we know who are left behind once we start looking at that data. And the justice system is a very important part of what we need to address and evolve. But there are other spaces out there like housing, like childcare, like education, like the child welfare system, where your expertise, your commitment, and your hands are just as necessary. So I just want to give an example of a couple of cases, because I think that may be what's helpful. I mean, certainly for me, the cases that we've had at Always have been mind-blowing and life-changing to me, because it gives me a bigger picture of understanding how are people made more vulnerable when they're growing up and in their adulthood. And so when I was introduced, you heard a little bit about my background. When I was in the Obama administration, I had this opportunity to sit on the White House Council on Women and Girls. And there are many different pieces of that people were doing work towards, whether it was STEM, getting more women and girls into science, technology, and education, whether it was financial security. But I worked on violence against women. That was the pillar that my boss, Secretary Napolitano, had experience and wanted to work in. And so what we did was, at the time, we kept having headlines in the newspapers of women who were calling 911 when they were abused, and instead of getting helped, they would end up in immigration detention because they were undocumented. That's not public safety. You think about public safety, and anyone should have the right to call 911 and to be protected. It's an awful example of how some people are left behind. And so what we tried to work on, and I can't say it's perfect, but certainly is improved. We've got to work with many partners, as a part of this work of changing policy within the federal government, of changing training within the federal government so that everyone would understand they are a part of the army that are there to protect victims of crime, whether it's domestic violence or child abuse or someone's mugged on the street. And we did a lot of work with local law enforcement, a lot of training with local domestic violence shelters, trying to build community so that we could be united in this idea, the value that we should be able to take for granted, that all victims will be given protection when they call 911. So we did that work, and it was amazing, and it felt amazing, but very much to my surprise, maybe a year and a half later, I ended up with a case that was very similar to that, of a young mom who had an abusive marriage, very abusive. She had separated, was trying to get away. At this point, she took her child to visit their father, and he decided he didn't want to give their child back. And he had threatened her throughout their marriage that he would call and have her deported if she ever called the police on him. Well, she did call the police. She needed her son. The father of her son was volatile. He was not predictable. And when she called 911, she ended up being detained put in an immigration detention center, having no access to her child. And while she was detained for months, the child's father went into the Maricopa Superior Court and got custody of their child and had said that basically she abandoned the child. So I didn't come in until she found help. Florence Project is a nonprofit we have here. They helped her file her application as a victim of crime, as a victim of abuse. She got out of detention. And I had the privilege of helping her family court, of going to a judge and trying to undo what was done and trying to tell her story. For anyone here who wants to go to law school, I know there are other ways to use it, contractual and so forth, but the biggest way that I use my law degree on a daily basis is I tell stories. I go to a judge, or I go to an immigration officer, or I go to an administrative board, and I tell the stories of my clients. And so for her story, we shared that with the judge. Now in that case, we got kind of lucky because the child's father admitted he had been addicted to heroin, that he could be abusive, but he wasn't at the moment. Those things help when you're in front of a judge. And of course, we got her son back, and orders in place that were designed to keep her son safe. But when you think about all that it took for that to happen, she shouldn't have had to be detained by calling 911. She found a nonprofit to help her get out of detention. She's lucky that she found a nonprofit always to help her in family court, because there are very few free family court legal services in Arizona. And then we were able to tell the judge her story, and we were able to use evidence that we had, text messages, police reports. For me, that case where I had to even call the sheriff's office to have a deputy in the room because the child's father was so volatile. It was really a full circle moment for me to understand this issue that I had been working on in DC, that we wanted for victims of crime to feel safer, to call 911 and not get arrested, detained. But it was, I hadn't seen it up close like this, other than what I saw in the news. And then there I was representing this woman who needed the system to work for her, needed the justice system to work for her. And it didn't in so many places until finally we had the power to make it work for her. And so when I would talk about the justice system, it is bigger than criminal justice. It involves all kinds of courts, family courts, civil courts, criminal courts, juvenile courts. Right now, our numbers in juvenile court, it is getting better. Less people are being detained in Arizona for juvenile offenses. That's an important thing to recognize. We're going the right way. But still, when you look at the numbers of who is in the juvenile justice system, you'll see racial disparities, you'll see income disparities, you'll see disparities with kids who have mental health issues, and kids who are in the foster care system, being overrepresented in juvenile court, meaning being charged with juvenile offenses. These are things that we, as a community, need to address. And there are people out there working on that, including ASU. It's really been fascinating because when I was an undergrad, I don't think we had the academic, the students, or the graduate students, or the faculty as involved in so many issues, in so many problem-solving ways. And so I appreciate that. But those are things that we can think about. Criminal justice system. This summer, last spring, I got a call from a young mom, and her question, she heard about us, and her question to me was, If I give my children to the child welfare system, can I get them back? That's a big question. Of course, as a lawyer, as an individual, I would never, ever in my life encourage someone to voluntarily give their children to the child welfare system. Why did she have that question? Because she had a prostitution conviction that required a 30-day jail term. No one is going to convince me that a 30-day jail sentence is what is warranted in our system of justice for this individual or for any individual. I have represented so many victims of abuse whose abusers will then spend a day in jail. And so for this young mom to call me, desperate, because she had nowhere to leave her kids for her jail term, contemplating involving a very complicated child welfare system, bringing that into your life, boy. And so what we had the privilege of doing for her was going to the judge and telling her story, because not only was she convicted of prostitution, but she was a trafficking survivor. She had been in a trafficking program, she had been a mentor to other trafficking survivors. And so even though that case had already been convicted, we went back to it. We called the prosecutor. We went before the judge. And we were able not only to get rid of the jail term, but to actually get that conviction dismissed. Because that was in the interest of justice. And as we walked out of court, what she said to me was, boy, they didn't treat me that nice the first time. They didn't treat me with respect until I showed up with a lawyer. It isn't the way that our justice system should work, but it is sometimes. So when we talk about really building a system that leaves no one behind, I mean, I think we need to keep in mind litigation isn't the only thing, but it's one. It's one way that we are refining, overhauling, transforming our systems of justice. And remember that our systems of justice it comes back really to the three branches of government. We have courts that are not just sentencing people, not just giving family court orders, but are shaping policy every day in their decisions. And so litigation is one way that we build a justice system, but remember, litigation is after the fact, right? Litigation is something wrong has already happened. Maybe something unconstitutional, maybe something that violates the Equal Protection Clause, maybe something that just violates another law. But that judicial branch, as a litigator, whether you are representing one individual, as we do all the time always, or whether you go and you work for the government maybe, or you work for a nonprofit. Right now, so much of our environmental policy, climate change actions, they're happening in courtrooms. Whether they're for or against them, you have courtrooms, you have lawyers on both sides of those issues trying to either protect the planet or protect private interests, and you see those in the courtroom. That other branch of government that we have is legislative. And that's the one branch I've never worked in. I have never worked for a congressman or the state legislature. I have a lot of friends who do, and they really appreciate their role in that. But that's another area, legislation, where we see policy being made. We see laws being passed that can overhaul. Who are we talking about when we talk about public safety? Let's make sure we're talking about that mom that I represented who was detained when she called 911. That's where we come in, whether we're voting, or whether you're running for office, or whether you're working for someone in those elected offices, where they have an opportunity to help reshape, refine, transform justice. And then we have the executive branch. That's where I spent quite a bit of my career, working for a governor and working for the Obama administration. And you see a lot of things happen. You know, DACA, we're all so familiar with DACA now. That came out of the executive branch, came out of an executive order using a small area of the law they glommed onto and said, we're going to make justice happen this way. And there's one thing that you know, we need as a community, that the leaders that we have in place, both of nonprofits, of government, is political courage. We have to find language, in my opinion, where we can talk to each other. It's a very interesting time because, you know, I'm 50. Although my kids call me a boomer, I'm not a boomer. But my sons and your generation are challenging all these notions and ideas and establishment in ways that you know, my generation didn't. So my generation, we weren't really the ones that built all of it, but we didn't come out and say, man, we need to change that. We need to change that. This isn't fair. Until I think we start hearing from you. When, you know, we had a lot of stuff happen this year. In January 6th, we saw our insurrection, a riot, whatever term we want to use, at the Capitol. I'm talking to my son, who is 16, and saying, this is just unbelievable. It's insane, it's crazy, I've never seen anything like this. And he comes back to me and he says, well, what do you mean it's insane? We've had slavery in this country. We've had mass incarceration in this country. Our planet is dying in this country. Those are insane things. And he's right. And so I think a lot of people who are in my shoes, now entering those leadership positions, we are being so informed by you, by your generation, by your political courage, by your sense of what is right, what is justice, what is righteous. And we're not always going to maybe agree on exactly what that is, but you guys being there, you wanting to study justice studies, you wanting to go to law school, or you wanting to work in a nonprofit, or you wanting to find your way to have an impact, you're tired of status quo, I can just tell you that it's a gift, it's needed. I personally appreciate it because I have a really wonderful community of mentees, but I learn just as much from them as they learn from me. Quite frankly, I often feel like I learn more from them because they help me shift my paradigm all the time. And so I really do, I mean, you know, not to put the weight of the world on your shoulders because there's so much to work on. But there are people being left behind. And some of us, we know that. Because of our own experiences or our family experiences, and some of us just see it and we want to be a part of changing it. We're on the cusp of these really big challenges as we watch, you know, in Phoenix. My husband and I graduated from law school in 1996. We bought our first home for $103,000. You guys don't get to do that. You know, when we were renting an apartment in Tucson at U of A, we paid $500 a month. You guys don't get to do that. When we went to school, in law school, it was $5,000 a year. You guys don't get to do that. And I think that you being able to push on those things, to say, to remind people how much more is on your plate, because I see it. I see it in part because of my sons. I see it because my mom who's now in her 70s and is looking to buy a house, and there aren't affordable options out there. These are challenges that are really going to start and are starting to snowball. This pandemic, it uncovered so much of the inequity that exists in our community. And for the first time in a long time, we saw government show up. We see stimulus checks. We see child tax credit, which is now in place. And this may not mean a lot to you at this point if you don't have kids. But I'll tell you, representing a lot of young moms who live on the edge, when you meet someone who wants help desperately to get out of an abusive home, but can't because they can't afford a place to live, and because when they need to work, they actually can't afford childcare, I mean, that's reality. One of the most scary cases I had, where I prayed for her safety. And every day when I did see an article in the paper about a woman having her life taken, being killed, I worried, and I just said, please don't let it be her. She had been in an abusive relationship, abusive marriage. She never called the cops, but her neighbors called the cops so often that one day they said, we're not leaving you here. The police said, we're not leaving you here anymore. The community that showed up, she went to a domestic violence shelter. That domestic violence shelter helped her get an order of protection. That domestic violence shelter at the time also had what's called transitional living program, meaning a housing program where you could live for a longer amount of time. And then we went to court with her, where her husband had a lawyer, and she didn't. And we pulled police reports, not just that were called to her home when she was abused, and he had abused other people, including members of his family. We got medical records for when she was put in the hospital. We got text messages where, he's using the ugliest language possible against her. And we got the orders that we needed. They were probably some of the most strict visitation orders I've seen. And we were grateful, and I still worry for her safety to this day. But all those things came together for her, and she was from another country, as was her husband. And I asked her at one point, do you think you'll go back home? Because her parents were in her home country. And she said, absolutely not, because nobody would have helped me in my country. And so it's a recognition that we have built some of the supports that are necessary, which she's comparing it to her home country. We showed up for her. The question is, how more often do we do it so she could have had affordable housing and child care without having to go through all she did, because maybe she could have left earlier. We do have a system that often leaves people behind. We also have some systems in place and people who find the work, people like yourselves, and many of the people I've worked with who don't get paid a lot, but they love the work they do. They find their own pathways. They find ways to serve people. And so for me today, it's really just sharing a little bit about my own path. Maybe it sparks things for you. But more importantly, having seen what I've seen, there have been moments of extreme hope and a lot of pain. And so what do we do as we're moving forward in order to help people be more stable, be more secure, be more safe? In my mind, I always describe public safety. It's not just about how many police are on the street and in jails. That's not public safety by itself. Public safety is affordable housing. Public safety is childcare. Public safety is having mental health and substance abuse treatment available. I mean, when we really want to talk about public safety, about keeping children safe, about keeping women safe, about keeping individuals safe, all those factors come into play. And it's our job to try to rebuild the safety net that used to be stronger. And I know that we can do that, and there's some very interesting things on the horizon right now. If, DC can start to move this stuff, things that could be very consequential for families. So that's really all the remarks that I wanted to share. I know we have time for questions. I'm happy to address any questions any way you'd like. I went to law school. I have been so glad I went to law school. I think there's something very unique about how you can use the power of the law to help people, but it is not the only path. I have friends who've got an MSW. I have friends who've got graduate degrees in criminal justice studies, in sociology, in even psychology, and found their ways to either build their own things that are helping people or find their place in the system to try to help individual people. So again, I want to thank you guys for being here, for choosing to be a part of Building Solutions, and thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Okay. So the question is, how do you motivate other people to speak to the causes that are my causes? That's an interesting question. I have quite a bit of causes. As always, we serve trafficking survivors, we serve kids who've been abused, we serve women who've been abused, we see youth who are on their own, there's been an epidemic of kids in the foster care system, other adults in their life stealing their stimulus checks. You name it. I think I work in areas where people tend to care. And in a lot of the things that I work in, it's hard to make them political. Not everyone has the political will to address them. But in fact, most people at their core know this is not right. Everyone who walks in our door shouldn't have to deal with what they deal with. I used to say, how resilient my clients were, and it would inspire me. And it really is true that they are resilient, and it's absolutely true that every single client I've served inspires me, leaves a mark on me, reminds me of why I do what I do. But the truth is that kids and young adults, they shouldn't have to be as resilient as they have to be sometimes. They shouldn't have to be as resilient as the demands require them to be. So I do find that people are willing to and ready to be a part of the work that we do in different ways. Sharing stories is one way of motivating people to understand our work and to want to be a part of it. Why do you believe so many people are left behind? I think of two things. Number one, I don't believe that most of it is intentional. But the people who are often building systems, who are passing laws, who are passing budgets, they don't know oftentimes what these struggles are like. They don't know what it's like not to be able to afford your rent, not to be able to afford to feed your kids, not to feel safe or actually be safe in your own home. And I think that's part of it, is the people who are in charge and who are developing policies and budgets and making these big decisions so often are people who just don't know what it's like for many people in their homes. And secondly, a couple years ago, I was at this very small museum in Tucson, and it's a railway museum. I mean, really small. It's basically in a couple of cabooses. This little, and it's like has some exhibits. And they had this old newspaper article that was posted on the wall or framed. And the headline in the article very clearly was saying how, at the time it was Native Americans, I'm sure that's not the word they used, were being rounded up to keep everyone safe. And think about what that means. I mean, it means they were only interested in keeping some people safe. And people who were outside of that circle were seen as the danger, as the attacker. And it's something that has stayed with me, because I think even when people don't understand that is how their mind is working, even when it's unintentional, that sometimes those paradigms are still in place. And when they think about public safety, when they think about how do I keep my own kids safe, it means leaving out of that circle of safety that they're creating people who don't look like them, people who don't talk like them, people who, perhaps have different beliefs. And I do think that's another factor. We have to protect our own instead of challenging ourselves, which we, are doing, and your generation is such an important part of doing. Guess what? Get away with that anymore. And so I think those are two factors that contribute to people being left behind. Okay, what type of law is my favorite and why? So I in my career have practiced criminal law, immigration law, administrative law. When I worked for the governor, we drafted legislation sometimes. I've been in family law courts, which definitely are not my favorite because they're emotional. They're very emotionally draining. I probably would say, for me, my favorite has been the criminal cases where I've been representing our trafficking survivors, because it's an opportunity to remind myself that sometimes the justice system is absolutely flipped on its head. That, I have these survivors who are dealing with criminal charges instead of the people who exploited them, who beat them, who used them. And it's fun when you walk into court with someone who came to you hopeless. I mean, we have a big conference table at Always. People come in there, and the first time we sit down and we meet with them, and people are hopeless, they're desperate, they're despondent. Sometimes I can't even recognize the person between the first day I met them and the last day of our case. Because at the end, when they can walk into court with a lawyer, when they can feel heard, when they can feel represented, when they can see for the first time that the system worked for them, and they're holding their head up high, those are absolutely my best moments in my own practice of law. Okay, so the question is, at the start of your career, what was the most concerning flaw I saw in the justice system? So, as I mentioned, I started out as a deputy county attorney. That's the county prosecutor, one who handles most crimes. When I started at the county attorney's office, I was assigned to the East Valley. So I had cases from Tempe, Scottsdale, Chandler, Mesa. I felt very much at the time like an equal opportunity prosecutor. My caseload was very diverse. And about a year or a year and a half later, I transferred downtown Phoenix, and my caseload didn't look the same. My caseload was the vast majority brown and black defendants. And that's when it felt different. And even though I was never put in an ethical situation, I worked at the time for a man named Rick Romley, who was the county attorney. He was not of my same political party, but I never saw politics come into our work. But I couldn't help but look at my caseload and see that something was wrong somewhere. And I grew up in Phoenix. I grew up in, for part of that, in South Central Phoenix. We've seen what it looks like to have a heavy law enforcement presence in our neighborhood and how that plays out with, especially the males. And that started to weigh on me once I got downtown Phoenix and had that caseload. And it became, for me, very much a spiritual decision about where did I see myself fitting in and using my law degree. And at that time, that's when I moved over to the Attorney General's office. I worked on elder abuse and fraud by providers, and it just felt better. I again felt like an equal opportunity prosecutor when I got to working on those cases. So for me, that was that moment. I can share that. I mean, I was young, but that happens in our work where, we see things and like your spidey sense goes off and you just start to feel like something feels wrong. And then you have to decide, where do you fit in? Your God-given, naturally given talents and intelligence and work ethic, what do you want to put that to? And so for me, that was that moment for me.